I sat there, staring blankly at the termination letter in my trembling hands. 18 years of loyalty, countless sacrifices, and one accusation wiped it all away. But what hurt more than losing everything was knowing who had set me up, someone I trusted the most. The fluorescent lights in the conference room seemed harsher than usual that Tuesday morning in October. The mahogany table that had witnessed countless strategic meetings and successful deals now felt like a courtroom bench, cold and unforgiving. Across from me sat Alex Turner, my boss of 8 years, his face a mask of professional disappointment that I would later recognize as expertly crafted theater. "Daniel, I'm sorry it has come to this," Alex said, his voice carrying just the right amount of regret to sound believable. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. The board has made their decision." Evidence. The word echoed in my mind like a death knell. 3 days earlier, I had been Daniel Carter, senior financial analyst at Sterling Capital, one of New York's most prestigious investment firms. I had a corner office on the 32nd floor with a view of Central Park, a six-figure salary, and the respect of my colleagues. Now I was sitting across from the man I had mentored, supported, and trusted, being accused of embezzling $2 million from client accounts. "Alex, you know me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know I would never—" "The transaction records don't lie, Daniel." He slid a folder across the table. "Your authorization codes, your digital signature, your access logs, it's all there." I opened the folder with shaking hands, my eyes scanning documents that looked authentic but felt like fiction. Wire transfers to offshore accounts I had never seen before. Authorization forms bearing my electronic signature. Access logs showing late-night activity from my computer terminal. It was comprehensive, convincing, and completely false. "This is impossible," I said, looking up at Alex. "You know my work ethic, my integrity. We've worked together for 8 years. You were at my wedding, for God's sake." Something flickered in Alex's eyes then, something that might have been guilt or perhaps satisfaction. It was gone so quickly I almost missed it. But in that moment, a terrible realization began to form in the back of my mind. "I'm truly sorry. Daniel, security will escort you out. Your personal effects will be sent to you." The next few hours passed in a blur of humiliation. Security guards flanked me as I was walked through the office where I had spent the better part of 2 decades building my career. Colleagues I had worked alongside for years avoided eye contact, some whispering behind their hands as I passed. The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell, each floor marking another level of my fall from grace. By evening, the story had broken. Sterling Capital analyst accused of major embezzlement screamed the headlines across financial news websites. My photograph, pulled from the company website, stared back at me from dozens of articles. The narrative was already being written, and I was cast as the villain. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former colleagues, and curiosity seekers all wanted a piece of the story. I turned it off after the 10th call and sat in my Manhattan apartment, looking out at the city that had been my kingdom just that morning. Now it felt like a prison. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in character assassination. The media painted me as a trusted insider who had betrayed that trust for personal gain. Financial analysts on television discussed my case as an example of corporate corruption. I became a cautionary tale, a name whispered in boardrooms as an example of what happens when greed overcomes integrity. My lawyer, a competent but expensive attorney named Robert Chen, did his best to mount a defense, but the evidence against me was overwhelming. Every document looked authentic. Every digital trail led back to me. It was as if someone had studied my work patterns, my habits, my digital footprint, and used that knowledge to construct the perfect frame. "Daniel, I have to be honest with you," Robert said during one of our meetings. "The prosecution has a strong case. The evidence is extensive and appears legitimate. Unless we can find something to discredit it, you're looking at serious prison time." Prison. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had never even received a parking ticket, and now I was facing years behind bars for a crime I hadn't committed. As the legal proceedings dragged on, my personal life crumbled. My wife, Sarah, whom I had married 15 years earlier, stood by me initially. But as the months passed and the financial pressure mounted, the strain became too much. She filed for divorce, taking our daughter Emily with her. I want to believe you, Daniel. Sarah said the night she left. But I can't risk Emily's future on your innocence when the evidence is so overwhelming. Emily, my 17-year-old daughter, who had been my pride and joy, looked at me with confusion and disappointment the last time I saw her. Dad, just tell me the truth. Did you do it? The fact that she had to ask broke something inside me. I had always been her hero, the man she could count on for anything. Now I was a source of shame, a father she had to defend at school against the whispers and accusations of her classmates. No, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to look her in the eyes. I swear to you, I didn't do this. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. But I could see the doubt there, the seeds of uncertainty that would grow over time. The trial was a public spectacle. The prosecution painted me as a calculating criminal who had used my position of trust to steal from the very clients I was supposed to protect. They presented a timeline of suspicious activity, character witnesses who testified to my expensive tastes and financial pressures, and a mountain of digital evidence that seemed insurmountable. My defense felt weak by comparison. Robert tried to raise questions about the authenticity of the evidence, but without concrete proof of tampering, his arguments fell flat. Character witnesses from my past seemed unconvincing in the face of such overwhelming evidence of guilt. Alex testified against me, his performance flawless. He spoke of his disappointment, his feelings of betrayal, and his determination to see justice done. He was the picture of a wronged supervisor, reluctantly testifying against a trusted employee who had violated that trust. Watching him on the stand, I felt a chill run down my spine. The way he spoke, the careful modulation of his voice, the practiced expressions of regret and disappointment. It was all too perfect, too rehearsed. But I had no proof. Only suspicion and the growing certainty that the man I had trusted most had orchestrated my downfall. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. I was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years for good behavior. As I sat in my cell that first night, I replayed the last 2 years of my life, searching for clues I had missed. Alex had been the one to suggest I take on the Meridian account, the client whose funds had allegedly been embezzled. He had been the one to recommend the new financial software that had supposedly been used to facilitate the theft. He had been the one to suggest I work late several nights, alone in the office, during the time period when the crimes had allegedly occurred. Each memory was like a piece of a puzzle, and slowly, a picture began to emerge. Alex hadn't just betrayed me, he had carefully, methodically set me up. But why? What had I done to deserve such elaborate revenge? The answer came to me in a flash of painful clarity. 3 years earlier, Alex had made a pass at Sarah at the company Christmas party. She had rebuffed him and told me about it the next day. I had confronted him, and he had apologized, claiming he had been drunk and didn't know what he was doing. I had accepted his apology and never mentioned it again, thinking the matter was closed. But Alex Turner was not the kind of man who forgot a slight or forgave a humiliation. I had embarrassed him, and he had spent 3 years planning his revenge. He had studied me, learned my habits, gained access to my accounts and systems, and constructed the perfect frame. And I had been so trusting, so loyal, that I had never seen it coming. Prison was hell, but it was also my crucible. Stripped of everything I had once considered important, my job, my reputation, my family, I was forced to confront who I really was beneath all the trappings of success. I spent hours in the prison library, reading about financial fraud, digital forensics, and legal procedure. I began to understand how someone could manipulate financial systems, how digital evidence could be fabricated, how a skilled criminal could make the innocent appear guilty. I also began to plan, if Alex Turner thought he had destroyed me, he was wrong. I was down, but I wasn't out, and I would find a way to prove my innocence and make him pay for what he had done. The first year was the hardest. The other inmates saw me as a white-collar criminal, someone who had lived a life of privilege before falling from grace. I was neither feared nor respected, just another former executive who had been brought low by his own greed. I kept to myself, spent my time reading and thinking, and slowly began to formulate a plan. My first breakthrough came in the form of a letter from an unexpected source. Marcus Riley had been a junior analyst at Sterling Capital when I was arrested. I barely remembered him, but he remembered me. In his letter, he explained that he had left Sterling 6 months after my arrest, uncomfortable with the culture of the company and suspicious of Alex Turner's rapid rise within the firm. "I never believed you were guilty," Marcus wrote. "Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Alex seemed too eager to see you prosecuted, too quick to accept the evidence without question. I've been doing some digging on my own, and I think I found something you should know about." I wrote back immediately, and over the next several months, Marcus and I developed a correspondence that would prove to be the foundation of my comeback. He had discovered that I wasn't the first Sterling Capital employee to be accused of financial impropriety under Alex's supervision. Over the past 5 years, 3 other employees had been terminated for various financial irregularities, all of them potentially devastating to their careers, but not quite serious enough to warrant prosecution. "He's done this before," Marcus wrote in one letter. "Maybe not on the same scale, but he's been systematically eliminating people who might pose a threat to his advancement. You were just the biggest fish he decided to fry." This revelation gave me hope, but I needed more than suspicion and coincidence to prove my innocence. I needed evidence, and I needed allies on the outside who could help me gather it. My second breakthrough came in the form of Sophia Ellis, an investigative journalist who had been following corporate corruption cases for the past decade. She had been researching Sterling Capital for an article about the investment industry when my case caught her attention. Something about the evidence against me seemed too convenient, too perfect. "I've covered dozens of financial fraud cases," she wrote in her first letter to me. "The evidence in your case is unusually comprehensive for someone who supposedly tried to cover their tracks. Most embezzlers make mistakes, leave gaps in their plans. Your case looks like it was constructed by someone who knew exactly what evidence would be needed to secure a conviction." Sophia agreed to investigate my case, working with Marcus to uncover the truth about Alex Turner and his activities at Sterling Capital. Over the next year, they made steady progress, uncovering a pattern of suspicious behavior that extended far beyond my case. Alex had been systematically targeting employees who posed a threat to his advancement, using his position and technical skills to fabricate evidence of misconduct. He had started small, with minor infractions that resulted in termination rather than prosecution. But as he grew bolder and more skilled, he had begun to target higher-profile employees with more serious accusations. I was his masterpiece, the culmination of years of practice and planning. He had studied me for months, learning my habits and routines, gaining access to my computer systems and financial accounts. He had used sophisticated software to create false digital trails, forged electronic signatures, and manipulated transaction records. And he had done it all while maintaining the appearance of a loyal colleague and friend. The evidence Sophia and Marcus gathered was compelling, but it still wasn't enough to overturn my conviction. We needed something more definitive, something that would prove beyond doubt that I had been framed. That something came in the form of a confession from an unexpected source. Janet Morrison had been Alex's administrative assistant during the time of my alleged crimes. She had always been friendly to me, but we had never been particularly close. However, she had apparently been closer to Alex than anyone realized. I was having an affair with him. She admitted to Sophia during a recorded interview. I knew it was wrong, but he was so charming, so confident. He made me feel special, important. I would have done anything for him, including helping him frame me for embezzlement. Janet had provided Alex with access to my computer systems, had helped him create false transaction records, and had even forged my signature on several documents. She had done it all for love, believing that Alex would leave his wife and marry her once he had achieved the success he craved. But Alex had discarded her as soon as my case was closed, moving on to his next target without a backward glance. Janet's confession, recorded by Sophia and verified by Marcus, provided the smoking gun we needed to prove my innocence. The process of overturning my conviction was slow and frustrating, but eventually, justice prevailed. Janet's confession, combined with the pattern of behavior Sophia and Marcus had uncovered, was enough to convince a federal judge that my case deserved a new trial. The prosecution, faced with overwhelming evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and false testimony, agreed to drop all charges against me. I walked out of prison after serving 2.5 years. A free man, but a changed one. The experience had stripped away everything I thought I knew about myself and the world, but it had also given me something invaluable, the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The first thing I did after my release was to find a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan world I had once inhabited. I needed time to process what had happened to me, to plan my next moves carefully. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The financial industry had moved on without me, but I discovered that my skills were still valuable. I began working as a freelance consultant, helping small businesses with their financial planning and analysis. The work was satisfying in a way that my corporate job had never been, and I found myself building a reputation for honesty and integrity that had been stolen from me years earlier. As my consulting business grew, I began to plan my return to the world that had cast me out. I wasn't interested in revenge in the traditional sense. I wanted something more meaningful than that. I wanted vindication, not just for myself, but for all the other employees Alex had destroyed over the years. The opportunity came in the form of Sterling Capital's annual investor gala, a high-profile event that brought together the most influential people in the financial industry. I had attended the event many times during my tenure at the company, but now I would be returning as an outsider, someone whose very presence would serve as a reminder of the company's past mistakes. I spent months preparing for the event, gathering evidence and planning my presentation. I knew I would have only one chance to make my case, and I needed to make it count. With Sophia's help, I compiled a comprehensive dossier of Alex's crimes, including detailed evidence of how he had framed me and several other employees over the years. The night of the gala, I stood outside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, watching the parade of expensive cars and designer gowns that marked the arrival of New York's financial elite. I had once been part of this world, had considered these people my peers and colleagues. Now I was an outsider, but I was also something they weren't. I was free. I had arranged for Sophia to be at the event as a member of the press, and Marcus had managed to secure an invitation through his new job at a competing firm. We had planned our approach carefully, knowing that we would have only one chance to make our case. Alex was there, of course, more successful and confident than ever. He had been promoted to senior vice president in the years since my imprisonment, and he was now one of the most powerful executives at Sterling Capital. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, shaking hands and making small talk with the same practiced charm that had once fooled me. I waited until he was in the middle of a conversation with several major investors before making my move. I approached the group with confidence, my presence causing a ripple of surprise and discomfort among those who recognized me. "Alex," I said, extending my hand with a smile. "It's been a long time." The color drained from his face as he recognized me, but he recovered quickly, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Daniel," he said, shaking my hand with obvious reluctance, "I heard you were released. I'm glad to see you're doing well." "Better than well, actually," I replied, my voice carrying just enough edge to make him uncomfortable. "I've been doing some consulting work, helping companies identify and prevent financial fraud. It's amazing what you can learn when you've been on the receiving end of a sophisticated scheme." The investors around us were listening now, their curiosity piqued by the obvious tension between us. Alex tried to excuse himself, but I wasn't finished with him yet. "In fact," I continued, "I've been working with some investigative journalists on a story about corporate corruption in the financial industry. It's fascinating how some executives use their positions to eliminate competition and advance their careers. The methods they use are quite sophisticated, really. Digital manipulation, forged documents, manufactured evidence. It's almost artistic in its complexity." Alex's face was pale now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He knew what was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice to address the crowd that had gathered around us, "I have a story to tell you about corruption, betrayal, and the ultimate price of ambition. It's a story about how one man destroyed the lives of multiple employees to advance his own career, and how justice, though delayed, eventually prevailed. What followed was a masterclass in public humiliation. I presented my evidence methodically, supported by Sophia's investigative reporting and Marcus's testimony. I showed the crowd how Alex had systematically targeted employees, how he had used his technical skills and insider knowledge to fabricate evidence, and how he had destroyed lives and careers for personal gain. The response was immediate and devastating. Investors began backing away from Alex, their faces showing disgust and anger. Sterling Capital executives scrambled to distance themselves from him, and several board members called for an immediate investigation. By the end of the evening, Alex Turner's career was over. He was fired from Sterling Capital within a week, and criminal charges were filed against him shortly thereafter. He was eventually convicted of multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But for me, the real victory wasn't in seeing Alex punished. It was in the restoration of my reputation and the vindication of my innocence. Sterling Capital issued a public apology, acknowledging that I had been wrongfully accused and offering to reinstate me with full back pay and benefits. I declined their offer. The company that had been so quick to cast me out when I was accused no longer held any appeal for me. I had built something better, something that belonged entirely to me. My consulting business flourished, growing from a one-man operation to a respected firm that specialized in financial fraud, prevention, and corporate governance. I hired Marcus as my first employee, and together we built a company based on the principles of integrity and transparency that had been so lacking in my previous career. The personal vindication was just as important as the professional success. Sarah reached out to me after the truth came out, apologizing for doubting me and asking if we could try to rebuild our relationship. But too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. We were able to establish a cordial co-parenting relationship, but the marriage was over. My relationship with Emily was more complicated. She was in college by the time I was released from prison, and she had spent her formative teenage years believing her father was a criminal. It took time, patience, and many difficult conversations, but eventually we were able to rebuild our relationship. She came to work for my consulting firm after graduation, and we developed a professional partnership that eventually evolved back into a loving father-daughter relationship. "I'm sorry I doubted you, Dad," she said one day as we were working late on a particularly complex case. "I should have known you would never do something like that." "You were just a kid," I replied, putting my arm around her shoulders. "You had to process a lot of confusing information, and everyone around you was telling you I was guilty. I don't blame you for having doubts." "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you survive all of that and come back stronger?" I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. "I learned that I'm not defined by what happens to me, but by how I respond to what happens to me. Alex thought he could destroy me by taking away my job, my reputation, my freedom, but he couldn't take away who I really am, and he couldn't break my determination to prove my innocence. Years have passed since that night at the Plaza Hotel, and I've had time to reflect on everything that happened. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when the odds seem insurmountable. I learned that betrayal, while painful, can also be a catalyst for growth and change. Being framed for a crime I didn't commit forced me to examine my life, my values, and my priorities in a way that I never would have done otherwise. It stripped away the comfortable illusions I had about loyalty and friendship, but it also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. The experience also taught me about the power of allies and the importance of persistence. Without Marcus's suspicions, Sophia's investigative skills, and Janet's eventual confession, I might never have been able to prove my innocence. Their support reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there are people willing to fight for justice and truth. Most importantly, I learned that success isn't just about achieving your goals, it's about how you achieve them. Alex Turner reached the heights of corporate success, but he did so by destroying other people's lives. His success was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal, and it ultimately crumbled under the weight of his own corruption. My success, on the other hand, is built on integrity, hard work, and genuine relationships. It's taken longer to achieve, and it's been much more difficult, but it's also more meaningful and sustainable. I sleep well at night, knowing that I've built something worth having, something that can't be taken away by false accusations or manufactured evidence. Today, I run one of the most respected financial consulting firms in the country. We specialize in helping companies prevent fraud and improve their governance practices, and our client list includes some of the biggest names in business. The irony isn't lost on me that my experience as a victim of financial fraud has made me an expert in preventing it. I've also become an advocate for criminal justice reform, working with organizations that help wrongfully convicted individuals rebuild their lives after exoneration. I know firsthand how difficult it can be to restart your life after being falsely imprisoned, and I want to make sure that others don't have to face that challenge alone. The consulting firm offices are in a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, not far from where Sterling Capital once stood. The company folded 3 years after Alex's conviction, unable to recover from the scandal and the subsequent investigations that revealed systemic corruption throughout the organization. Sometimes I walk past the building that once housed Sterling Capital, and I think about the man I used to be. That Daniel Carter was successful but naive, trusting but blind to the darker aspects of human nature. He lived in a world where loyalty was rewarded and hard work was enough to guarantee success. The man I am now is different. I'm more cautious, but also more resilient. I've learned to trust my instincts and to question motives that seem too good to be true. I've learned that the world can be cruel and unfair, but I've also learned that justice, though sometimes delayed, is possible. My office has a view of Central Park, not unlike the one I had at Sterling Capital all those years ago, but this view is different because it belongs to me, earned through my own efforts and built on a foundation of truth rather than deception. Emily works in the office next to mine, having proven herself to be every bit as talented and ethical as I could have hoped. She's engaged to a young lawyer who works for a nonprofit organization that provides legal aid to the indigent. They're planning a wedding next spring, and I'll be walking her down the aisle with pride. Sarah remarried 2 years ago, to a doctor who treats her with the respect and kindness she deserves. We maintain a cordial relationship, bound together by our shared love for Emily and our mutual understanding of the journey we've all taken. As for Alex Turner, he's serving his sentence in the same federal prison where I once spent 2.5 years of my life. I don't take pleasure in his imprisonment, but I do take satisfaction in the knowledge that justice was eventually served. He destroyed multiple lives in pursuit of his ambitions, and he's now paying the price for those choices. The final irony is that Alex's scheme ultimately failed to achieve its intended purpose. He had wanted to eliminate me as competition and advance his own career, but in the end, his actions led to his own downfall and my eventual triumph. The man he had tried to destroy became stronger, more successful, and more respected than he ever was. I've learned that revenge is a dish best served cold, but vindication is a meal that's even more satisfying. Alex Turner thought he had taken everything from me, but he was wrong. He took my job, my reputation, and my freedom, but he couldn't take my integrity, my determination, or my will to fight back. In the years since my exoneration, I've received countless apologies from former colleagues who believed I was guilty, from investors who shunned me during my darkest hour, and from friends who abandoned me when I needed them most. I've accepted these apologies graciously, but I've learned to be more selective about the people I trust and the relationships I invest in. The experience has made me a better judge of character, more attuned to the subtle signs of deception and manipulation that I once missed. I've learned to trust my instincts, to ask hard questions, and to demand transparency in all my business dealings. But I've also learned not to let cynicism overwhelm me. For every Alex Turner in the world, there are people like Marcus Riley and Sophia Ellis, individuals who are willing to fight for truth and justice even when it's difficult or dangerous. The key is learning to distinguish between the two, to protect yourself from the predators while remaining open to the genuine allies. My consulting firm has grown to employ over 50 people, each of them carefully vetted not just for their professional skills, but for their character and integrity. We've created a culture based on transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. It's the kind of workplace I wish I had found at Sterling Capital all those years ago. We've helped dozens of companies improve their governance practices and prevent fraud. And we've saved our clients millions of dollars in potential losses. More importantly, we've helped create workplaces where employees can trust their colleagues and their leadership, where success is achieved through merit rather than manipulation. The work is challenging and rewarding, but it's also a constant reminder of the importance of staying vigilant. Corporate corruption is a persistent problem, and there are always individuals who are willing to sacrifice others for their own advancement. My job is to help companies identify and eliminate these threats before they can cause damage. I often speak at conferences and seminars about my experience, sharing my story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of corporate accountability. These speaking engagements have become an important part of my work, helping to educate executives and employees about the warning signs of fraud and corruption. The most common question I'm asked is how I found the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. The answer is that I didn't have a choice. Giving up wasn't an option because I knew I was innocent, and I knew that somewhere out there was evidence that would prove it. The only question was whether I would live long enough to find it. But more than that, I fought because I had to. Not just for myself, but for every other employee who had been victimized by Alex Turner's schemes, and for every other person who might fall victim to similar corruption in the future. I fought because justice isn't just about individual vindication. It's about creating a world where such injustices are less likely to occur. The journey from disgrace to vindication has been long and difficult, but it's also been transformative. I'm not the same man who sat in that conference room 18 years ago reading his termination letter with shaking hands. That man was successful but naive, trusting but vulnerable. The man I am today is harder but wiser, more cautious but also more resilient. I've learned that the world can be cruel and unfair, but I've also learned that it's possible to overcome even the worst injustices if you're willing to fight for the truth. Standing in my office now, looking out at the city that once cast me out, I feel a sense of accomplishment that goes beyond financial success or professional recognition. I've reclaimed not just my career and my reputation, but my sense of self-worth and my faith in justice. The termination letter that once symbolized my downfall now hangs framed on my office wall, not as a reminder of my humiliation, but as a testament to my resilience. Next to it hangs the federal judge's order dismissing all charges against me, and below that, a photograph of Emily and me at her college graduation. These items tell the story of my journey from disgrace to vindication, from victim to victor. They remind me every day that no matter how dire the circumstances, no matter how overwhelming the evidence against you, it's possible to fight back and win if you're willing to persevere. Alex Turner thought he could destroy me by fabricating evidence and manipulating the system. He was wrong. He couldn't destroy me because he couldn't change who I really was underneath all the trappings of success. He could take away my job, my reputation, and my freedom, but he couldn't take away my integrity, my determination, or my refusal to give up. In the end, his scheme backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying me, he made me stronger. Instead of ending my career, he helped me build a better one. Instead of breaking my spirit, he forged it into something unbreakable. The phone on my desk rings, interrupting my thoughts. It's a potential client, a small company that suspects one of their executives of financial impropriety. They've heard about my reputation for uncovering fraud and want my help investigating the situation. I smile as I pick up the phone. This is exactly the kind of work I was meant to do, helping good people protect themselves from the predators who would exploit their trust. It's work that has meaning beyond the financial rewards, work that makes a difference in the lives of real people. Daniel Carter, I say into the phone. How can I help you? As I listen to the client's story, I'm reminded once again of why I do this work. Somewhere out there is another innocent person who's been set up by someone they trusted, another victim of corporate corruption who needs an advocate, and I'm here to help them, drawing on my own experience to guide them through the darkness and back into the light. The sun is setting over Manhattan, casting long shadows across my office. In a few hours, I'll go home to my apartment in Brooklyn, where I'll spend the evening reading or working on my memoir, the book that will tell the full story of my journey from disgrace to to vindication. But for now, I'm here, doing the work I love, helping people fight back against injustice and corruption. It's not the career I had planned all those years ago, but it's the career I was meant to have. And it's a career that belongs entirely to me, built on a foundation of truth and integrity that no one can ever take away. Losing everything taught me one invaluable lesson. I wasn't broken, just rebuilt stronger. Now, it was my time.